Why silence is the most underrated communication tool. Introduction. Most people fear silence. The moment a conversation pauses, they rush to fill the gap. They explain more, talk faster, add unnecessary details, make nervous jokes, say things they never intended to say. To many people, silence feels uncomfortable, awkward, dangerous. But the most effective communicators understand something that others miss. Silence is not the absence of communication. Silence is communication. In fact, some of the most powerful messages are delivered without words at all. A pause can create curiosity. A moment of silence can communicate confidence. A deliberate absence of words can reveal more than a lengthy explanation. Yet because silence feels uncomfortable, most people never learn how to use it. They talk when they should pause, react when they should reflect, explain when they should listen, and in doing so, they unknowingly weaken their influence. This book explores a simple but powerful truth. The strongest communicator in the room is often not the person speaking. It is the person who knows when to remain silent. Chapter 1. The Fear of Silence. Why do people fear silence so much? Because silence creates uncertainty, and the human mind dislikes uncertainty. When a conversation pauses, the brain immediately starts asking questions. Did I say something wrong? Are they upset? Should I say something? Is this awkward? The mind rushes to eliminate the discomfort. The easiest way to remove the discomfort is to talk. So people talk. Even when they have nothing important to say. Even when silence would serve them better. The irony is that silence only feels awkward when people interpret it as awkward. Confident communicators see silence differently. They see it as space. Space to think. Space to listen. Space to observe. Space to understand. And because they are comfortable with silence, others often perceive them as calm, composed, and confident. Why nervous people over-explain? One of the clearest signs of communication anxiety is over-explaining. Someone asks a simple question. Instead of giving a concise answer, the person continues talking, adding details, providing unnecessary justifications, repeating themselves. The motivation is usually fear. Fear of misunderstanding, fear of judgment, fear of appearing incompetent. But excessive explanation often creates the opposite effect. It weakens confidence. Strong communicators trust that their message is sufficient. They say what needs to be said. Then they stop. And that ability to stop creates power. The confidence hidden in silence. Imagine two people answering a question. The first speaks rapidly, filling every second with words. The second answers clearly and then remains silent. Who appears more confident? Usually the second. Why? Because confidence does not feel compelled to prove itself constantly. Confidence is comfortable with pauses. Comfortable with reflection. Comfortable with uncertainty. This is one reason silence is associated with authority. People often interpret calm pauses as evidence of self-assurance. The beginning of real listening. Most people think listening means staying quiet while someone else talks. That is only part of listening. Real listening requires attention, curiosity, presence. And silence creates the opportunity for all three. When you stop thinking about your next response, you begin hearing things you previously missed. Tone, emotion, meaning, intentions. The silence inside your own mind becomes as important as the silence in the conversation. And that silence creates understanding. The first lesson: silence is not emptiness. It is space. And in communication, space is often where understanding begins. Chapter 2. Why powerful people pause before they speak. One of the most noticeable habits of powerful communicators is not what they say. It is what they do before they say it. They pause. Not for dramatic effect. Not because they are unsure. Because they are thinking. While most people react, powerful communicators respond. And there is a significant difference between the two. A reaction is immediate. A response is intentional. The space between those two actions is often a moment of silence. And that moment can completely change the outcome of a conversation. The problem with instant responses: modern life rewards speed. Fast replies. Instant messages. Quick decisions. Immediate opinions. As a result, many people develop the habit of speaking before thinking. They answer before understanding. React before reflecting. Respond before processing. This creates problems. Words spoken in haste often become words people regret. Relationships are damaged. Opportunities are missed. Conflicts escalate. All because there was no pause. No space between emotion and action. The power of the pause: a pause does something remarkable. It interrupts automatic behavior. Instead of reacting emotionally, you create time for awareness. Time to think. Time to choose. Time to consider consequences. Even a 2-second pause can dramatically improve communication. Because those 2 seconds allow intelligence to catch up with emotion. And intelligence usually gives better advice. Why pauses signal confidence? Confident people do not feel pressured to answer instantly. They are comfortable taking a moment to think. They understand that thoughtful answers are more valuable than immediate answers. In contrast, insecure communicators often feel compelled to respond immediately. They fear that hesitation will make them appear uncertain. Ironically, the opposite is often true. People tend to respect those who take time to think, because thoughtful communication suggests competence. The interview example. Imagine 2 candidates during a job interview. One answers every question instantly. The other pauses briefly before responding. Who appears more thoughtful? Usually the second. Why? Because the pause signals consideration. It communicates. I'm thinking carefully about this. That message increases credibility, not because of the silence itself, because of what the silence represents. Why leaders pause? Exceptional leaders often pause before making decisions, before responding to criticism, before addressing conflict, before answering difficult questions. They understand that leadership requires judgment, and judgment improves when emotion is given time to settle. The pause becomes a tool, a safeguard against impulsiveness, a mechanism for better thinking. Silence creates authority. Watch highly respected speakers. Many use silence strategically, after important points, before answering questions, during moments of reflection. The silence captures attention. It creates anticipation. It gives weight to their words. Because words become more valuable when they are not rushed. Think of silence as white space in communication. Without white space, everything blends together. With white space, important ideas stand out. The psychology of anticipation. Silence creates anticipation. When someone pauses before speaking, listeners naturally become more attentive. The brain starts wondering, what are they going to say next? That curiosity increases focus. The pause becomes a spotlight, directing attention toward the upcoming message. This is why skilled speakers often pause before delivering their most important points. Why emotional conversations need silence. When emotions run high, silence becomes even more valuable. Anger, frustration, disappointment, fear. These emotions often push people toward immediate reactions. Yet emotional reactions are rarely the most effective responses. A pause creates emotional distance. Not avoidance. Distance. Enough distance to think clearly. Enough distance to choose wisely. Enough distance to prevent unnecessary damage. The 3-second rule. One simple communication habit is the 3-second rule. Before responding to something important, wait 3 seconds. Not awkwardly. Naturally. Use those 3 seconds to think, reflect, understand. Those few seconds can prevent countless mistakes. Because thoughtful responses usually outperform impulsive ones. Silence helps you learn. People who speak constantly limit what they can learn. People who pause and listen learn continuously. The pause creates observation. Observation creates information. Information creates understanding. And understanding improves communication. This is why many highly effective communicators spend more time gathering information than expressing opinions. Why silence reduces regret. Most communication regrets share a common characteristic. They happen too quickly. Someone spoke in anger, defensiveness, fear, embarrassment. The words escaped before reflection occurred. Silence acts as a buffer, a protective space, a chance to reconsider. And often, that reconsideration changes everything. The difference between weak silence and strong silence. Not all silence is the same. Weak silence comes from fear. Strong silence comes from control. Weak silence avoids communication. Strong silence improves communication. The difference lies in intention. When silence is intentional, it becomes a powerful tool. When it is driven by fear, it becomes avoidance. Learning the difference is essential. Why great negotiators use silence. Skilled negotiators understand the power of silence. After making an offer, they often remain quiet. After asking a question, they remain quiet. After hearing an answer, they remain quiet. Why? Because silence encourages others to speak. And the person speaking usually reveals information. Information creates advantage. Not through manipulation, through understanding. The quieter person often learns more. And the person who learns more usually negotiates better. The discipline of delayed reaction. One of the most valuable communication habits is delayed reaction. Not delayed forever. Just delayed enough to think. When criticized, pause. When challenged, pause. When surprised, pause. When emotional, pause. The pause creates freedom. Freedom from automatic behavior. Freedom from impulsive reactions. Freedom to choose a better response. Why silence feels uncomfortable. Many people avoid pauses because silence exposes uncertainty. Without words, there is nowhere to hide. No distractions. No defenses. Just presence. Yet learning to tolerate that discomfort builds confidence. Because confidence grows when you stop needing constant reassurance. And silence teaches that lesson beautifully. The hidden strength. The strongest people are not always the quickest responders. They are often the most thoughtful responders. They understand that words have consequences. That emotions pass. That perspective improves with reflection. And that silence provides the space necessary for wisdom. The real secret. The pause itself is not powerful. What makes it powerful is what it creates. Awareness. Reflection. Understanding. Choice. The pause transforms communication from automatic to intentional. And intentional communication almost always produces better outcomes. Perhaps the most important truth of all is this: powerful people do not speak immediately because they can. They pause because they choose to. They understand that not every thought deserves expression. Not every emotion deserves action. Not every reaction deserves a response. Sometimes the most intelligent thing you can say begins with saying nothing at all. Because in the small space between stimulus and response lies one of the greatest sources of communication power: choice. And silence creates that choice. Chapter 3. How silence makes you more persuasive than talking. Most people believe persuasion is about words. Finding the perfect argument. Using the right logic. Delivering a compelling speech. Presenting convincing evidence. And while words certainly matter, persuasion is often influenced by something far less obvious: silence. The strongest persuaders do not overwhelm people with information. They do not flood conversations with endless explanations. They understand a fundamental psychological truth. People are more persuaded by conclusions they reach themselves than by conclusions forced upon them. And silence helps create those conclusions. The problem with talking too much: imagine trying to convince someone of an idea. You provide one argument, then another, Then another. Then 5 more. You keep talking because you believe more words will create more persuasion. But something unexpected happens. The other person begins resisting. Not because your arguments are weak. Because they feel pressured. The human mind naturally resists pressure. The harder someone pushes, the stronger the resistance often becomes. This is called psychological reactance. People want the freedom to choose their own conclusions. And excessive talking can threaten that freedom. Why silence creates space for thinking? Persuasion requires thought. People need time to process information, evaluate ideas, consider possibilities. Yet many communicators never allow that process to occur. They speak continuously, filling every available second. The result is overload. Silence solves this problem. A pause creates mental space, and mental space allows ideas to settle. The power of letting words land. Imagine hearing a powerful statement. Immediately after hearing it, the speaker continues talking. The impact decreases. Now imagine a different scenario. The speaker delivers the statement, then remains silent. The silence gives the message room to breathe, room to expand, room to resonate. The listener naturally reflects on the idea, and reflection strengthens persuasion, because people internalize what they contemplate. Why questions are more powerful than statements? Many persuasive communicators rely heavily on questions. Questions create curiosity, exploration, self-discovery. And after asking a thoughtful question, they often remain silent. Why? Because silence encourages thinking. For example, what do you think would happen if you tried a different approach? Then silence. The silence creates a psychological invitation. The other person begins searching for an answer. And the answer they discover themselves often carries more weight than advice imposed from the outside. Silence encourages participation. Conversation should not be a monologue. It should be an exchange. When people talk continuously, they reduce participation. When they create pauses, they invite participation. Participation increases engagement. Engagement increases investment. And investment increases persuasion. People support ideas they help create. The sales lesson. Skilled sales professionals often understand the power of silence. After presenting a proposal, they stop talking. Many inexperienced salespeople do the opposite. They continue explaining, adding details, offering justifications, talking themselves into trouble. The experienced salesperson understands something important. Once the message is delivered, silence often becomes more persuasive than additional words. Because the customer now needs time to think. Why silence creates confidence? People often interpret silence as confidence. Why? Because confident individuals do not feel compelled to fill every gap. They trust their message, trust their preparation, trust their ability. That trust appears calm, and calmness creates credibility. In contrast, nervous communicators often speak excessively. Not because they have more to say, because they feel uncomfortable with silence. The courtroom example. Many skilled attorneys understand this principle. After asking an important question, they remain silent. They allow the witness to answer fully. And often, the silence encourages the witness to keep talking, sometimes revealing more information than originally intended. Silence creates space. And people naturally fill space. Why people reveal more during silence? Silence has an interesting psychological effect. It encourages disclosure. When a pause occurs, many people feel a subtle urge to continue speaking, to elaborate, clarify, expand. This tendency often reveals valuable information. That is why skilled interviewers, negotiators, therapists, and leaders frequently use silence. Not as manipulation, as a tool for understanding. The emotional impact of silence. Silence can also create emotional intensity. Consider a heartfelt conversation. Someone shares something vulnerable. Instead of immediately responding, you pause. The pause communicates presence. Respect. Attention. It tells the speaker, what you just said matters. Sometimes silence communicates empathy more effectively than words. Why over-explaining weakens persuasion? Many people mistakenly believe that explaining more increases clarity. Sometimes it does. But beyond a certain point, additional explanation can reduce effectiveness. Over-explaining often signals uncertainty, as though the speaker is trying to convince themselves. Strong communicators know when enough has been said, and they allow silence to do the rest. The leadership application. Great leaders often use silence strategically. After asking a question, after presenting a vision, after hearing feedback, the silence creates room for reflection, and reflection encourages better thinking. Leaders who dominate every conversation often limit the ideas available to them. Leaders who create space often discover insights they would otherwise miss. Silence and emotional intelligence. Emotionally intelligent communicators understand that not every moment requires a response. Sometimes people need understanding rather than advice. Presence rather than solutions. Space rather than words. Silence allows those needs to be met. Because silence demonstrates patience, and patience communicates respect. Why silence feels risky. Many people avoid silence because they fear losing control of the conversation. They worry. What if nothing happens? What if it becomes awkward? What if they disagree? Yet these fears often underestimate the value of silence. Silence rarely harms meaningful communication. More often, it strengthens it. Because it creates room for authenticity. The persuasion paradox. The persuasion paradox is simple. The harder you try to force persuasion, the less persuasive you become. The more space you create for independent thought, the more persuasive you become. Silence creates that space. And space allows ownership. People trust conclusions they arrive at themselves. The most powerful pause. Imagine finishing an important statement and simply stopping. No additional explanation. No unnecessary justification. No nervous talking. Just silence. That silence communicates confidence, conviction, trust. And often, those qualities are more persuasive than the words themselves. The real reason silence persuades because it respects the listener. It gives them time to think, time to process, time to decide. Instead of pushing, it invites. Instead of forcing, it encourages. Instead of dominating, it collaborates. And people respond positively to that experience. Perhaps the most important truth of all is this: persuasion is not about overwhelming people with words. It is about creating understanding, creating reflection, creating ownership, and silence helps create all three. The strongest communicators know when to speak, but the wisest communicators know when to stop speaking. Because sometimes the most persuasive part of a message is not the message itself. It is the silence that follows it. Chapter 4. The hidden power of silence in difficult conversations. Most people can handle silence when life is easy. The real test comes during difficult conversations. When emotions are high. When disagreements emerge. When criticism appears. When relationships feel strained. When disappointment, anger, frustration, or fear enter the room. These are the moments when silence becomes both the hardest skill to use and the most valuable. Because difficult conversations rarely fail due to a lack of words. They fail because of words spoken too quickly, too emotionally, too defensively, too carelessly. The very moments that tempt us to speak immediately are often the moments when silence is needed most. Why difficult conversations trigger reactions. Human beings are emotional creatures. When we feel attacked, criticized, rejected, or misunderstood, the brain shifts into a defensive mode. Suddenly, communication becomes less about understanding and more about protection. The mind starts generating responses. That's not true. You're wrong. Let me explain. You don't understand. The goal becomes self-defense. And self-defense often creates conflict. Because when one person becomes defensive, the other person usually responds in kind. The conversation quickly turns into a battle. The pause that prevents damage. Imagine someone criticizes you. Your immediate reaction is anger. You feel misunderstood. Part of you wants to respond instantly. Now imagine choosing silence for just a few seconds. Not avoidance. Not surrender. A deliberate pause. Those few seconds create something extraordinary: perspective. Instead of reacting emotionally, you gain time to think, to assess, to understand. And that understanding often changes your response entirely. Why silence lowers emotional intensity. Emotions function like waves. They rise, peak, and eventually begin to fall. The problem is that many people speak at the emotional peak. They respond when emotions are strongest. Unfortunately, that is often when judgment is weakest. Silence allows emotions to settle. Not completely, but enough to regain clarity. And clarity dramatically improves communication. The difference between reaction and response: a reaction is automatic. A response is intentional. Reactions are driven by emotion. Responses are guided by awareness. The difference between the two is often a moment of silence. That pause creates space. And inside that space exists choice. The ability to decide rather than simply react. This may be one of the most important communication skills a person can develop. Why silence helps you hear the real message during conflict. People often focus on the words being spoken. But beneath the words is usually something deeper. Fear, frustration, disappointment, hurt, unmet needs. Silence helps you hear those deeper messages. Because when you stop preparing your defense, you begin paying attention. And attention reveals meaning. The argument most people never win. Many people believe the goal of conflict is victory. To prove a point. To establish correctness. To win. But winning often comes at a cost. The relationship suffers. Trust weakens. Distance grows. The conversation may end, but the problem remains. Silence changes the objective. Instead of focusing on winning, it encourages understanding. And understanding creates better outcomes than victory alone. Why silence makes you less defensive. Defensiveness thrives on speed. The faster people react, the more defensive they become. Silence interrupts this pattern. It slows the conversation, creates reflection, allows questions to emerge. For example, why am I reacting so strongly? What are they actually trying to say? Could there be some truth here? These questions rarely appear during immediate reactions. They appear during thoughtful pauses. The power of listening without interrupting. One of the greatest gifts you can offer during a difficult conversation is uninterrupted attention. Most people interrupt because they fear being misunderstood. Or because they desperately want to defend themselves. Yet interruption often makes conflict worse. Because the other person feels unheard. And people become louder when they feel unheard. Silence allows them to finish. And completion often reduces emotional intensity. Why silence creates emotional safety. Emotional safety is essential during difficult conversations. People need to feel they can speak honestly without being immediately attacked. Silence contributes to that safety. Not silent judgment. Not cold silence. Attentive silence. The kind that communicates. I'm listening. I'm considering what you're saying. I'm trying to understand. That kind of silence builds trust. Even during disagreement. The negotiation advantage. Silence is especially powerful during negotiations. Many people become uncomfortable when a pause occurs. And discomfort often causes them to reveal more information, make unnecessary concessions, or weaken their position. Experienced negotiators understand this. They remain calm, comfortable, patient. And that patience often produces better outcomes. Because silence encourages information, and information creates leverage. Why silence protects relationships. Many relationships are damaged by impulsive words. Words spoken in anger. Words spoken in frustration. Words spoken during emotional moments. Once spoken, those words cannot be taken back. Apologies may help, but memories remain. Silence acts as protection. It prevents temporary emotions from creating permanent consequences. The strength to say nothing. Sometimes the strongest response is no response at all. Not because you lack an answer. Because you recognize that speaking would not improve the situation. This requires emotional maturity. The ability to prioritize outcomes over ego. The ability to choose effectiveness over immediate satisfaction. And that choice often separates wise communicators from impulsive ones. Why silence feels difficult. Silence feels difficult because it forces us to sit with discomfort, anger, frustration, uncertainty, the urge to defend ourselves. Most people want immediate relief. Talking provides temporary relief. Silence provides long-term benefit, but long-term benefits often require short-term discomfort. And that discomfort is where growth occurs. The hidden respect in silence. When you genuinely listen without interrupting, you communicate respect, not agreement. Respect. You demonstrate that the other person's perspective deserves consideration, that their thoughts deserve attention, that their experience matters. This respect can transform difficult conversations, because respect reduces hostility. The wisdom of waiting. Not every conversation requires an immediate answer. Not every conflict requires an immediate solution. Sometimes clarity arrives later. After reflection. After emotions settle. After perspective improves. Silence creates room for that process. And that room often leads to wiser decisions. The relationship test. Think about the people you trust most. Chances are they do not react impulsively. They listen. Consider. Reflect. Respond thoughtfully. Their silence feels safe rather than threatening. And that safety strengthens relationships. Because trust grows when people know they will not be judged instantly. The real purpose of silence. Silence is not about avoiding difficult conversations. It is about improving them. It creates understanding, reduces emotional intensity, encourages reflection, protects relationships, and promotes wiser responses. The goal is not less communication. The goal is better communication. And silence helps make that possible. Perhaps the most important truth of all is this: difficult conversations are rarely ruined by too much listening. They are usually ruined by too much reacting. Silence interrupts reaction, creates reflection, encourages understanding, and gives wisdom a chance to catch up with emotion. That is why silence is not weakness during conflict. It is strength. Because the person who can remain calm, thoughtful, and present during emotional moments possesses one of the rarest communication skills of all: the ability to choose understanding before reaction. And that ability changes everything. Chapter 5. Why silence makes you appear more confident and respected. Walk into any room and observe the people carefully. You will notice something interesting. The loudest person is not always the most respected. The person speaking the most is not always the most influential. And the individual demanding attention is not always the one receiving it. In fact, many of the most respected people possess a quality that often goes unnoticed. They are comfortable with silence. They do not rush to speak. They do not interrupt constantly. They do not feel compelled to express every thought. They speak when necessary, listen when appropriate, and remain silent when silence serves them better. This ability creates an impression of confidence that words alone cannot achieve. Why people mistake volume for confidence. Many people confuse confidence with loudness. They assume that speaking frequently demonstrates certainty, that dominating conversations demonstrates authority, that having an opinion about everything demonstrates intelligence. But true confidence looks different. True confidence is calm, measured, intentional, It does not need constant validation. And because it does not need validation, it is comfortable remaining silent. The insecure need to fill space. People who lack confidence often feel pressure to fill every gap in a conversation. A pause appears. They speak. Silence emerges. They explain more. Another pause appears. They begin talking again. Why? Because silence creates uncertainty, and uncertainty makes them uncomfortable. The talking is not always about communication. Sometimes it is about self-reassurance. A way to reduce anxiety. A way to avoid feeling exposed. Confidence does not rush. One of the clearest signs of confidence is patience. Confident communicators are rarely in a hurry to prove themselves. They trust that their value will become apparent. They trust their abilities, their knowledge, their judgment. As a result, they do not feel compelled to dominate every conversation. This patience often appears as quiet confidence. And people naturally respect it. Why silence creates presence? Presence is the ability to be fully engaged in the current moment. Most people are distracted, thinking about what they will say next, checking their phones, planning future actions, replaying past events. Silent communicators often appear more present, because they are paying attention, observing, listening, absorbing information. And presence is surprisingly attractive. People feel it immediately. The power of deliberate speech. When someone speaks constantly, their words begin to lose impact. Not because the words are bad. Because there are too many of them. Value often comes from scarcity. And communication is no exception. When a person speaks selectively, people listen more carefully. Because every statement appears intentional. Deliberate. Important. Silence increases the perceived value of words. Why respected people listen more? Highly respected individuals often spend more time gathering information than expressing opinions. They ask questions, observe behavior, study situations, and only then do they speak. This approach provides two advantages. First, they learn more. Second, their eventual comments are usually more informed. The result is greater credibility. And credibility creates respect. The authority of calmness. During stressful situations, most people become reactive. They talk faster, think less clearly, allow emotions to take control. The calm person stands out immediately. Not because they are emotionless, because they are composed. And silence often supports that composure. A brief pause communicates control. Control communicates confidence. Confidence earns respect. Why leaders use silence? The best leaders understand that leadership is not performance. It is influence. And influence often requires listening. When leaders dominate conversations, they reduce opportunities to learn. When leaders create space, they encourage participation. Employees contribute more. Teams share more information. Ideas improve. Trust grows. The silence becomes productive, not passive. The meeting room effect. Think about a meeting. One person speaks constantly. Another listens carefully and contributes selectively. Who usually appears more thoughtful? Often the second person. Because selective communication suggests discernment. It communicates. I speak when I have something meaningful to add. People respect that restraint. Because restraint signals confidence. Why silence creates mystery? Human beings are naturally curious. When someone reveals everything immediately, curiosity disappears. When someone speaks thoughtfully and selectively, curiosity remains. Others wonder. What are they thinking? What's their perspective? What will they say next? This curiosity increases attention, and attention often increases influence. The difference between quiet and weak. One common misconception is that silence equals weakness. Nothing could be further from the truth. Weakness is the inability to act. Silence is often a deliberate choice. A strong person can speak. They simply choose not to speak unnecessarily. That choice requires self-control. And self-control is a form of strength. Why silence improves decision-making. People who speak constantly often make decisions quickly. Sometimes too quickly. People who pause tend to consider alternatives, gather information, reflect, evaluate. As a result, their decisions are often more thoughtful. And thoughtful decisions create credibility over time. Others begin trusting their judgment. Because their judgment consistently produces results. The respect factor. Respect is not earned through constant talking. It is earned through consistent behavior, integrity, competence, composure, thoughtfulness. Silence supports all of these qualities. Because silence encourages observation, reflection, and intentional action. The social advantage. In social situations, people often feel pressure to be entertaining, interesting, impressive. Yet many meaningful relationships are built through listening, not performing. The individual who asks thoughtful questions and listens attentively often creates stronger connections than the person trying to impress everyone. Because people enjoy being heard. And being heard creates positive feelings. Why silence makes your words stronger. Imagine highlighting every sentence in a book. Nothing stands out. Now imagine highlighting only a few key passages. Those passages become powerful. Speech works the same way. If every moment is filled with words, nothing feels important. Silence creates contrast. And contrast creates impact. The fewer unnecessary words you use, the stronger your meaningful words become. The hidden confidence signal. Perhaps the greatest confidence signal of all is this: being comfortable with not being the center of attention. Insecure people often seek attention. Confident people often focus on contribution. The difference is significant. One seeks validation. The other seeks value. And silence often accompanies the second approach. Becoming comfortable with silence. Like any skill, comfort with silence can be developed. Start small. Pause before responding. Allow brief moments of quiet. Resist the urge to fill every gap. Listen fully before speaking. Over time, silence begins to feel less awkward and more powerful. Because you discover something important. Nothing terrible happens when you stop talking. In fact, communication often improves. The real reason silence creates respect. Ultimately, silence creates respect because it demonstrates control. Control over emotions. Control over impulses. Control over attention. People respect those who can manage themselves. Because self-mastery is rare. And silence is often one of its clearest signs. Perhaps the most important truth of all is this: confidence is not the need to speak constantly. It is the ability to remain comfortable when you don't. Respect is not earned by dominating conversations. It is earned by contributing thoughtfully. The people who command the most attention are not always the loudest. They are often the most composed, the most observant, the most intentional, and the most comfortable with silence. Because silence is not empty. It is filled with confidence, presence, and quiet strength. And those qualities are impossible to ignore. Chapter 6. The silent listening technique that makes people instantly trust you. Trust is not built through clever words. It is not built through impressive credentials. It is not built through charisma alone. Trust is built through experience. Specifically, the experience of feeling understood. When people feel understood, they relax. Their defenses lower. Their openness increases. And trust begins to grow. The challenge is that most people are poor listeners. Not because they are unintelligent. Because they are distracted. They listen to reply. To advise. To correct. To compare. To tell their own story. As a result, truly being listened to has become surprisingly rare. And rarity creates value. This is where one of the most powerful communication tools comes into play: the silent listening technique. A method so simple that many people overlook it, yet so effective that it can transform relationships almost immediately. What is the silent listening technique? The technique is straightforward. When someone is speaking, resist the urge to interrupt, advise, correct, or redirect the conversation. Instead, maintain attention, remain present, use silence strategically, allow the speaker to fully express themselves. Most importantly, do not rush to fill pauses. This final step is where the magic happens, because people often reveal their deepest thoughts immediately after a pause. Why most people interruptions are usually not malicious. Most interruptions come from impatience, excitement, anxiety, or the desire to contribute. Someone begins sharing a story. Before they finish, the listener jumps in, maybe with advice, maybe with a similar experience, maybe with an opinion. The speaker immediately receives a message: what I want to say is less important than what you want to say. The interruption may be small, but the psychological effect is significant. Trust decreases, connection weakens, and openness shrinks. The power of letting people finish. One of the simplest ways to build trust is allowing people to complete their thoughts. Completely. Without interruption, without correction, without competition. This sounds obvious, yet it is surprisingly uncommon. Most people rarely experience uninterrupted attention, and when they do, it feels powerful, because it communicates respect. Why silence encourages deeper sharing? Imagine someone tells you about a difficult experience. They finish speaking. A pause follows. Many listeners immediately begin talking, but skilled communicators stay silent. The result is fascinating. The speaker often continues. They reveal more, explain further, share emotions they had not planned to mention. The silence acts as an invitation to go deeper. The human need to be heard. Every person carries thoughts and feelings they rarely express, not because they want to hide them, because opportunities rarely arise. Most conversations remain on the surface. When someone encounters a genuinely attentive listener, something changes. They begin sharing more honestly, more openly, more authentically, because they finally feel safe. Why advice often comes too early? Many people love giving advice. The problem is timing. Advice is often offered before understanding exists. Someone explains a challenge. Before they finish, solutions appear. Recommendations, strategies, fixes. The listener assumes they understand, but often they do not. The speaker feels unheard, and the advice loses effectiveness. The silent listening technique delays advice. It prioritizes understanding first. Understanding before solving. One of the most common communication mistakes is solving a problem that has not yet been fully understood. Imagine a doctor prescribing medication before completing an examination. It would seem irresponsible. Yet communicators do something similar every day. They prescribe solutions before understanding the situation. Silence helps prevent this, because silence creates space for information, and information improves understanding. The trust equation. Trust often grows according to a simple formula. Attention plus understanding plus consistency equals trust. Silence strengthens all three. It increases attention, improves understanding, and demonstrates consistent respect. Over time, people begin associating you with safety, and safety strengthens trust. Why silence feels so rare? Modern communication moves quickly. Texts, emails, notifications, social media, instant responses. Everything encourages speed. Silence feels unusual because society rarely practices it. Yet meaningful communication often requires slowing down, reflection, presence, attention. The very qualities silence encourages. The emotional benefit. People often feel emotionally lighter after speaking with an excellent listener. Even when no advice was given. Even when no solutions were offered. Why? Because expression itself can be healing. Being heard reduces emotional pressure, and silence creates room for expression. This is one reason therapists, coaches, and counselors often use silence so effectively. The difference between silent listening and passive listening: silent listening is not passive. Passive listeners appear distracted, disconnected, uninterested. Silent listeners are different. They are engaged, present, focused. Their silence communicates attention, not indifference. The distinction matters, because trust grows through presence, not absence. Why people reveal their true thoughts: many people initially share only part of what they think. The safer they feel, the more they reveal. Silence helps create that safety. Without interruptions, without judgment, without pressure, people gradually move deeper, and deeper conversations create stronger connections. The leadership advantage. Leaders who master silent listening gain access to valuable information. Employees share concerns. Customers reveal frustrations. Teams communicate openly. Because people speak more honestly when they feel heard. And honest information leads to better decisions. This is why great leaders often ask questions and then remain silent. They understand that listening generates insight. The relationship advantage. Strong relationships depend on understanding. And understanding depends on listening. When partners listen deeply, trust grows. When friends listen attentively, connection deepens. When family members feel heard, conflict decreases. The silent listening technique strengthens all of these relationships because it prioritizes understanding over response. Why silence communicates respect. Respect is not always expressed through words. Sometimes respect appears through attention, through patience, through allowing another person the space to speak fully. Silence communicates: I value what you're saying. I'm paying attention. You matter. These messages build trust naturally. Practicing the technique: the next time someone shares something important, listen fully. Resist interrupting. Allow pauses. Stay curious. Focus on understanding rather than responding. Notice what happens. You may discover that people begin sharing more openly, trusting more quickly, connecting more deeply, all because you created space. The hidden superpower. In a world filled with noise, listening has become a superpower. Not ordinary listening. Deep listening. Patient listening. Silent listening. The kind that makes people feel understood. And understanding remains one of the strongest foundations of trust. Perhaps the most important truth of all is this: people rarely remember every word you say. But they remember how they felt around you. They remember whether they felt heard, whether they felt respected, whether they felt understood. The silent listening technique creates those experiences. Not through clever arguments, not through impressive speeches, but through something much simpler: presence, attention, and the willingness to remain silent long enough for another person to feel truly heard. And when people feel truly heard, trust follows naturally. Chapter 7. How silence gives you an advantage in every negotiation. Most people think negotiation is a battle of words. The person with the strongest arguments wins. The person who talks the most wins. The person who can think the fastest wins. But experienced negotiators understand a different reality. Some of the most powerful moments in any negotiation happen when nobody is speaking. Because silence is not empty. Silence creates pressure, reveals information, encourages honesty, and shifts control. The people who understand this gain an advantage that many others never notice. Not because they are more aggressive. Because they are more patient. The biggest negotiation mistake: imagine making an offer. The other person hears it. A pause follows. The silence feels uncomfortable. You immediately begin talking. You explain, justify, clarify. Then, without realizing it, you start weakening your own position. This happens constantly. People fear silence so much that they negotiate against themselves. The discomfort becomes stronger than their strategy, and the desire to remove the discomfort causes mistakes. Why silence creates pressure? Human beings naturally seek resolution. When uncertainty appears, the mind wants closure. Silence creates uncertainty, and uncertainty creates pressure. Many people feel compelled to fill that pressure with words. The person who remains comfortable during silence often gains an advantage because they allow the pressure to work naturally. Not through manipulation. Through patience. The first person to speak often reveals more. One of the oldest negotiation principles is simple. The person who speaks first after a pause often reveals valuable information. Why? Because silence encourages disclosure. People begin explaining, defending, clarifying, expanding, and every additional piece of information helps create a clearer picture of the situation. Information is valuable, and silence often produces it. Why silence prevents costly mistakes? Negotiations involve emotion, excitement, fear, anxiety, urgency. These emotions can lead people to make poor decisions. Silence slows everything down. The pause creates space for thought, and thoughtful decisions are usually better than emotional decisions. The ability to remain silent often protects people from impulsive concessions. The confidence signal. Imagine two negotiators. One talks continuously. The other speaks selectively and remains calm during pauses. Who appears more confident? Usually the second. Confidence does not rush. Confidence does not panic. Confidence does not feel compelled to justify itself endlessly. Silence communicates. I am comfortable where I stand. And that message often increases credibility. The power of asking and waiting. Many people ask questions incorrectly. They ask, then immediately continue talking. The question never has time to work. Effective negotiators ask questions and wait. For example, what concerns you most about this proposal? Then silence. The silence invites thought, and thoughtful answers often reveal critical information. The question opens the door. The silence allows someone to walk through it. Why people reveal more than intended? Silence creates a subtle psychological urge. Many people feel uncomfortable when a pause lingers. To reduce the discomfort, they continue talking. And when people continue talking, they often reveal motivations, concerns, priorities, constraints, expectations. Information that may never have emerged if the conversation had moved too quickly. The salary negotiation lesson. Consider a salary negotiation. An offer is presented. The candidate immediately begins talking, explaining, justifying, defending. Now imagine a different approach. The candidate hears the offer, pauses, reflects, remains calm. The silence changes the dynamic. The conversation becomes more deliberate, more thoughtful, and often more favorable, because silence communicates confidence. Why silence improves decision quality? Negotiation is not simply about obtaining a better deal. It is about making better decisions. Silence improves decision quality by creating reflection. Reflection improves judgment. Judgment improves outcomes. This applies to business, relationships, career decisions, and everyday conversations. The trap of emotional negotiation. Emotional negotiators react quickly. They become excited by opportunities, defensive during criticism, anxious during uncertainty. Silence acts as a stabilizer. It prevents emotions from taking control, and emotional control creates strategic advantage, because clear thinking performs better than emotional thinking. Why great negotiators listen more than they speak? Many people imagine negotiators as persuasive talkers. In reality, great negotiators are often exceptional listeners. They gather information, observe behavior, notice patterns, ask questions, and remain silent long enough to learn. Their strength comes from understanding, not domination. And silence supports understanding. The hidden value of patience. Patience is one of the rarest advantages in negotiation. Most people want immediate answers, immediate results, immediate certainty. The patient person gains an advantage because they can tolerate uncertainty longer. And the ability to tolerate uncertainty often leads to better opportunities. Silence is an expression of patience. Why silence protects your position? Every unnecessary word creates risk. The more you talk, the more opportunities you create for misunderstanding, contradiction, weakness, or concession. This does not mean speaking less always improves outcomes. It means speaking intentionally improves outcomes. Silence encourages intentional communication. The observation advantage: when you stop talking, you start observing. Facial expressions, tone of voice, body language, hesitation, confidence, uncertainty. These signals provide valuable information. And information creates insight. The quiet observer often notices what the active talker misses. Silence during difficult negotiations. The more difficult the negotiation, the more valuable silence becomes. When emotions rise, silence slows the pace. When tension increases, silence creates stability. When confusion appears, silence creates clarity. The pause becomes a tool for maintaining control. Not control over others. Control over yourself. The ultimate negotiation skill. Many negotiation skills matter: preparation, strategy, communication, confidence. But all of them improve when supported by silence. Because silence creates the conditions necessary for better thinking. And better thinking creates better outcomes. Learning to stay quiet. The challenge is not understanding silence. The challenge is practicing it. Most people know they should pause, yet they continue talking. The habit is automatic. Breaking that habit requires awareness. The next time a pause appears, resist the urge to fill it immediately. Observe. Listen. Wait. You may discover that silence begins doing work that words cannot. The real secret of negotiation. The greatest negotiation secret is not persuasion. It is understanding. Understanding priorities, understanding motivations, understanding concerns. Silence helps create that understanding. Because silence encourages people to reveal what matters most. And once you understand what matters most, better decisions become possible. Perhaps the most important truth of all is this: negotiation is not won by the person who talks the most. It is often won by the person who understands the most. And understanding requires listening. Listening requires patience. And patience requires comfort with silence. The ability to remain calm during pauses is not merely a communication skill. It is a strategic advantage. Because while others rush to fill the silence, the patient communicator is gathering information, observing carefully, and making wiser decisions. And that quiet advantage can change the outcome of almost every negotiation. Chapter 8. Why silence is the ultimate sign of emotional control. Most people think emotional control means hiding emotions, keeping a straight face, never showing anger, never showing fear, never appearing affected. But true emotional control is not about suppressing emotions. It is about managing them. Feeling them without being controlled by them. Recognizing them without immediately acting on them. And one of the clearest signs of emotional control is the ability to remain silent when emotions demand that you speak. Because emotions love urgency. They whisper. Say something right now. Defend yourself. Get the last word. Make them understand. Fight back. Yet wisdom often says something different. Wait. And that wait is silence. The emotional reaction trap. Think about the last time someone criticized you. Perhaps they questioned your work, your decisions, your character. Maybe they misunderstood you completely. In that moment, what happened? Most likely, emotion appeared immediately. Anger, frustration, embarrassment, defensiveness. These reactions are normal. They are human. The problem is not feeling them. The problem is speaking from them. Because words spoken during emotional peaks are often words people regret later. Why emotions demand immediate action? Emotions evolved to help human beings survive. When danger appeared, quick reactions were useful. The brain learned to prioritize speed over accuracy. That system helped our ancestors survive physical threats. But modern conversations are rarely life or death situations. Yet the brain often reacts as though they are. A harsh comment feels threatening. A disagreement feels dangerous. A criticism feels like an attack. The emotional system activates, and suddenly the urge to react becomes powerful. Silence creates a buffer. Silence creates distance between emotion and action. Not a huge distance. Just enough. Enough to think. Enough to reflect. Enough to regain perspective. This small gap can completely change a conversation. Without silence. Emotion right pointing arrow reaction with silence. Emotion right pointing arrow reflection right pointing arrow response, and responses are usually far more effective than reactions. The difference between strength and impulse. Many people mistake impulsiveness for strength. They believe strong people immediately say what they think, immediately defend themselves, immediately respond. But genuine strength often looks different. It looks like restraint. The ability to remain composed when emotions demand action. The ability to think before speaking. The ability to choose a response rather than surrendering to impulse. That is emotional control. Why silence protects relationships? Most relationship damage occurs during emotional moments. Not because people lack intelligence. Because emotions temporarily overpower judgment. A harsh sentence. A cruel comment. An unnecessary accusation. A defensive reaction. These moments create wounds that can last far longer than the emotion itself. Silence acts as protection. A pause prevents temporary feelings from becoming permanent consequences. The power of not needing the last word. Many arguments continue for one reason: someone needs the last word. The need feels irresistible. The conversation could end peacefully. But one more comment appears. Then another. Then another. The conflict grows. Silence breaks the cycle. Because emotionally controlled people understand something important. Winning the last word is not the same as winning the situation. Sometimes the smartest response is no response. Why calmness creates influence. People naturally trust calm individuals during stressful situations. Not because calm people are always right. Because calmness suggests stability. When everyone else is reacting emotionally, the calm person becomes a reference point. A source of balance. A source of perspective. Silence often contributes to that calmness. Because silence slows emotional momentum. And slower momentum creates clearer thinking. The leadership lesson. During crises, people watch leaders closely. Not only for decisions. For emotional cues. If leaders panic, others panic. If leaders remain composed, others feel safer. One reason effective leaders use silence is that silence helps them maintain emotional control. It prevents reactive communication. And reactive communication often creates unnecessary problems. Why social media rewards the opposite. Modern culture often rewards immediate reactions. Instant opinions. Instant outrage. Instant responses. Speed becomes more important than thoughtfulness. Yet speed and wisdom rarely grow together. The fastest response is not always the best response. And the most emotionally controlled people understand this. They pause. Reflect. Then decide. Silence during criticism. Criticism is one of the hardest moments to remain silent. The instinct is immediate defense. To explain. Justify. Correct. Argue. Yet silence creates an opportunity. An opportunity to ask, is there anything useful here? Even unfair criticism sometimes contains valuable information. But finding that information requires emotional control. And emotional control often begins with silence. Why silence makes you harder to manipulate. Emotionally reactive people are easy to influence. Their emotions guide their behavior. Push the right emotional button, and they respond predictably. Emotionally controlled people are different. They pause, observe, think. This makes manipulation more difficult. Because emotional control creates independence, and silence strengthens emotional control. The confidence connection. Confidence and emotional control are closely related. People who trust themselves do not feel pressured to react immediately. They can tolerate uncertainty, criticism, disagreement, silence. Because their confidence does not depend on immediate validation, the pause becomes evidence of inner stability. Why silence feels difficult. Remaining silent during emotional moments is challenging because emotions seek release. They want expression, action, relief. Silence temporarily delays that relief. But the delay creates wisdom. And wisdom often saves people from mistakes. The discomfort is temporary. The benefits can last a lifetime. The Stoic principle. Ancient philosophers understood this lesson well. They taught that freedom comes from mastering your reactions, not controlling the world, controlling yourself. Because external events are often beyond your influence, your response remains within your control. Silence helps preserve that control. The emotional intelligence advantage. Emotional intelligence is often defined as the ability to recognize and manage emotions effectively. Silence supports both abilities. It helps you notice emotions, and it helps you manage them. Instead of reacting automatically, you become aware. Awareness creates choice. Choice creates control, and control improves outcomes. Why silence creates respect. People respect those who remain composed under pressure. Not because composure is easy. Because it is difficult. Anyone can react emotionally. Not everyone can remain thoughtful. The ability to stay calm when emotions are high demonstrates maturity. And maturity earns respect. The hidden freedom. Perhaps the greatest benefit of emotional control is freedom. Freedom from impulsive reactions. Freedom from emotional manipulation. Freedom from unnecessary conflict. Freedom from regret. Silence contributes to all of these freedoms. Because silence gives you time. And time creates choice. The real measure of strength. Many people believe strength is measured by what you can do. But some forms of strength are measured by what you can choose not to do. Not every criticism deserves a response. Not every insult deserves attention. Not every disagreement deserves an argument. Knowing when to remain silent requires wisdom. And wisdom is a form of strength. Perhaps the most important truth of all is this: emotional control is not the absence of emotion. It is the ability to experience emotion without surrendering to it. Silence makes that possible. It creates space between feeling and action. Between impulse and decision. Between reaction and wisdom. The people who master silence gain something incredibly valuable: the ability to choose their responses rather than being controlled by their emotions. And that ability is one of the greatest forms of personal power. Because true strength is not found in reacting. It is found in remaining in control when reaction feels easiest. Chapter 9. How silence makes your words more powerful. Most people believe powerful communication comes from saying more. More facts. More arguments. More explanations. More stories. More words. But communication does not work that way. In reality, the power of words often depends on the silence around them. Just as a diamond stands out because of the empty space surrounding it in a display case, words gain significance when they are surrounded by silence. Without silence, communication becomes noise. With silence, communication gains impact. This is why some people can say very little and command enormous attention, while others speak constantly and leave almost no impression. The difference is not always the quality of the words. Often, it is the strategic use of silence. Why constant talking reduces impact. Imagine listening to a song where every instrument plays at maximum volume from beginning to end. No pauses. No changes. No contrast. The result would be exhausting. Music becomes powerful because of rhythm, variation, pauses. Communication follows the same principle. When every moment is filled with words, nothing stands out. Silence creates contrast. And contrast creates emphasis. The psychology of scarcity. Human beings naturally value things that are scarce. Rare objects. Rare opportunities. Rare experiences. Attention works the same way. Words become more valuable when they are not overused. Someone who speaks constantly creates abundance. Someone who speaks thoughtfully creates scarcity. And scarcity attracts attention. People listen more carefully when they know every sentence is intentional. Why great speakers pause? Watch exceptional public speakers. They rarely rush. They do not race from one sentence to another. They pause. After important points. Before significant ideas. During emotional moments. The pause serves several purposes. It allows the audience to process information. It creates anticipation. And it increases emphasis. The silence tells listeners, pay attention. This matters. The power of the dramatic pause. The dramatic pause is one of the oldest communication techniques. Not because it sounds impressive. Because it works. When people expect continuous speech and encounter silence instead, attention increases. The brain becomes alert, curious, focused. The upcoming words suddenly feel more important. The pause acts like a spotlight, directing attention toward what comes next. Why fast talkers are often ignored. Fast talking is not always bad. But constant rapid speech creates problems. Listeners become overwhelmed. Important ideas get lost. The message blends together. The audience struggles to identify what matters most. Silence solves this problem. It separates ideas, creates structure, and improves clarity. The pause becomes a form of punctuation for spoken communication. Silence gives words weight. Imagine a judge entering a courtroom. The room becomes silent. When the judge speaks, people listen. Part of that attention comes from authority, but part comes from silence. The words emerge from quiet, and quiet gives them weight. The same principle applies in everyday life. Silence creates significance. Why over-explaining weakens authority? Many people believe that explaining more demonstrates competence. Sometimes it does. But excessive explanation often communicates uncertainty. It suggests, maybe my first explanation wasn't enough. Maybe I need to keep convincing you. Confident communicators trust their message. They make their point. Then stop. The silence communicates certainty, and certainty strengthens authority. The hidden strength of brevity. Some of history's most memorable statements were remarkably short. Their power did not come from length. It came from clarity. And clarity often requires restraint. Silence supports restraint. Because silence encourages people to stop talking once the point has been made. The result is stronger communication. Why silence improves storytelling? Every great story contains pauses. Moments of tension. Moments of anticipation. Moments where the audience wonders what will happen next. Without pauses, stories lose emotional impact. Silence creates suspense. And suspense creates engagement. This is why skilled storytellers use silence as intentionally as they use words. The emotional effect of silence. Silence can intensify emotion. Imagine someone sharing a deeply personal experience. After they finish speaking, a thoughtful pause follows. The silence communicates respect, attention, presence. The moment feels important. Now imagine immediately changing the subject. The emotional impact disappears. Silence protects emotional moments, and emotional moments create connection. Why leaders speak less? Many respected leaders are surprisingly economical with words. They do not comment on everything. They do not dominate every discussion. They speak when they have something meaningful to contribute. This selectiveness increases attention. Because people learn that when they speak, it matters. Silence helps create that reputation. The attention economy. Modern life is filled with noise. Notifications, advertisements, messages, videos, news, opinions. Everyone wants attention. Silence stands out because it is rare. The quiet communicator often becomes more noticeable than the loud communicator. Because silence creates contrast. And contrast attracts attention. Why silence makes you memorable. People rarely remember everything someone says. But they often remember how someone made them feel. Silence influences those feelings. It creates calmness, presence, confidence, thoughtfulness. As a result, the communicator becomes more memorable. Not because they spoke more. Because they spoke with greater intention. The art of ending a statement. One of the most powerful communication habits is ending a statement cleanly. Make your point. Then stop. Do not immediately explain it again. Do not weaken it with unnecessary words. Do not rush to fill the silence. Allow the message to exist. Allow it to settle. Allow it to work. This simple habit dramatically increases impact. Why silence creates curiosity. Curiosity grows when information is incomplete. When everything is explained immediately, curiosity disappears. Silence creates a small gap. A moment of uncertainty. And uncertainty sparks interest. People naturally lean in. Listen more carefully. Pay closer attention. The silence becomes an invitation. The confidence of saying less. One of the strongest confidence signals is the ability to say less. Not because you have less to offer. Because you trust that what you offer is enough. You do not need endless explanations. Constant validation. Continuous talking. You trust your message, and that trust becomes visible through silence. The communication multiplier. Silence functions like a multiplier. It increases the effectiveness of listening, the effectiveness of storytelling, the effectiveness of leadership, the effectiveness of persuasion, the effectiveness of emotional connection. Not because silence replaces words. Because silence strengthens them. The hidden secret of powerful speech. The secret is not choosing between words and silence. The secret is combining them. Words provide meaning. Silence provides emphasis. Words deliver the message. Silence gives the message room to breathe. Together, they create powerful communication. Perhaps the most important truth of all is this: words alone rarely create impact. Impact comes from contrast, from timing, from emphasis, from space. Silence provides that space. It transforms ordinary words into memorable ones. It transforms information into influence. It transforms communication into connection. Because the most powerful communicators understand something most people never learn. The strength of a message is not determined only by what is said. It is also determined by what is left unsaid. And silence gives words their power. Chapter 10. The Final Secret. Mastering Silence in a World That Never Stops Talking. We live in a world addicted to noise. Every day begins with notifications, messages, news updates, videos, emails, advertisements, opinions, arguments. Endless streams of information competing for attention. Silence has become rare. And because it is rare, it has become incredibly valuable. Most people spend their lives surrounded by noise but starving for clarity. They hear constantly. Yet they rarely listen. They speak constantly. Yet they rarely reflect. They react constantly. Yet they rarely think deeply. This is why mastering silence has become one of the most powerful skills a person can develop. Not because silence is magical. Because silence creates the conditions for wisdom. The world rewards noise. Modern culture often rewards visibility. The loudest opinion. The fastest response. The strongest reaction. The person who posts first, comments first, responds first. Silence can appear weak in such an environment. But appearances are deceptive. Because while noise attracts attention, silence often creates influence. And influence lasts longer than attention. The cost of constant noise. When life becomes too noisy, several things begin to happen. Focus weakens. Patience decreases. Emotions become harder to manage. Decision-making suffers. Relationships become shallower. Because meaningful understanding requires space. And noise leaves very little space. Silence restores that space. Why great thinkers loved silence. Throughout history, many of the world's most respected thinkers deliberately sought silence. Not because they disliked people. Because they valued clarity. They understood something modern society often forgets. Insight requires reflection. Reflection requires stillness. And stillness requires silence. The greatest ideas rarely emerge from constant distraction. They emerge from moments of quiet attention. Silence is a competitive advantage in a noisy world. Silence becomes a competitive advantage. Most people react immediately. The silent person reflects. Most people interrupt. The silent person listens. Most people seek attention. The silent person seeks understanding. Over time, these differences compound. Better decisions. Better relationships. Better communication. Better leadership. The advantage grows. Why silence improves self-awareness. Many people know very little about themselves. Not because they lack intelligence. Because they rarely stop long enough to observe their own thoughts. Silence creates self-awareness. It reveals patterns, habits, fears, desires, motivations. Without silence, self-understanding becomes difficult. Because the noise drowns out introspection. The relationship between silence and wisdom. Knowledge is information. Wisdom is understanding. Information can be gathered quickly. Wisdom develops slowly. And silence accelerates wisdom. Because silence creates reflection. Reflection turns experiences into lessons. And lessons become wisdom. Why listening is becoming a superpower. As communication becomes faster, listening becomes rarer. As listening becomes rarer, it becomes more valuable. The ability to genuinely listen now stands out more than ever. People remember listeners. They trust listeners. They open up to listeners. Because being heard is becoming increasingly uncommon. And silence is the foundation of listening. The courage to be silent. Many people think speaking requires courage. Sometimes it does. But silence often requires courage as well. The courage to resist reacting. The courage to tolerate uncertainty. The courage to remain calm when others expect immediate answers. The courage to listen when ego wants to speak. This courage creates strength. Quiet strength. The kind that does not need attention to exist. The discipline of restraint. Silence is ultimately an act of restraint. The ability to control impulses. Control emotions. Control reactions. Control attention. Restraint is rarely celebrated in modern culture. Yet it remains one of the defining characteristics of maturity. And silence strengthens restraint every time it is practiced. What silence teaches you over time? Silence teaches valuable lessons. It teaches patience. It teaches observation. It teaches emotional control. It teaches humility. It teaches understanding. Most importantly, it teaches that not every thought deserves expression. Not every opinion requires sharing. Not every situation requires intervention. Some situations improve when you simply observe. Why silence creates inner strength. Many people seek confidence externally. Approval. Recognition. Validation. Attention. Silence encourages a different form of confidence. Internal confidence. The confidence that comes from self-trust. The confidence that does not depend on constant reassurance. The confidence that remains stable even when nobody is watching. That confidence becomes one of life's greatest assets. The silent edge in every area of life. Silence improves communication, leadership, negotiation, relationships, emotional intelligence, decision-making, learning, self-awareness, persuasion. Very few skills influence so many areas of life simultaneously. This is what makes silence so powerful. Its effects spread everywhere. The misunderstood nature of silence. Many people view silence as passive. In reality, silence is often highly active. You are observing, listening, thinking, processing, reflecting, choosing. The silence may appear inactive from the outside, but internally, important work is occurring, and that internal work often leads to better outcomes. Becoming comfortable with silence. Mastering silence is not about becoming quiet all the time. It is about becoming intentional. Speak when speaking adds value. Listen when listening adds value. Remain silent when silence adds value. The goal is balance. Not muteness. Not constant talking. Intentional communication. The ultimate communication skill. After everything we have explored in this book, one truth becomes clear: silence is not the opposite of communication. Silence is part of communication. A critical part. Perhaps one of the most overlooked parts. The strongest communicators do not simply master words. They master pauses, timing, presence, attention, and silence. Final reflection. At the beginning of this journey, silence may have seemed like nothing. An empty space. A gap between words. But now you can see it differently. Silence is a tool. A signal. A strategy. A source of power. It creates confidence, builds trust, strengthens relationships, improves decisions, enhances persuasion, develops emotional control, and amplifies the impact of every word you choose to speak. The loudest person in the room is rarely the most powerful. The fastest responder is rarely the wisest. The person who talks the most is rarely the one who understands the most. Instead, true communication mastery often belongs to the person who understands when to speak and when not to. Because in a world that never stops talking, silence has become a rare skill. And rare skills create extraordinary results. Speak with intention. Listen with attention. Pause with confidence. And never underestimate the power of silence. Because some of the most important things you will ever communicate will be communicated without saying a single word.